Many people, or all people, when they return from a long trip, the first thing that they say is, what did they say? Home, sweet home. And they're saying that the house, their home, is the best. And regardless of what place that they travel from and how good the place was, coming back home is the best place. And regardless of how arduous or how difficult and how many times that we would say it, that it goes this way. Now, Paul is traveling right now and is going from Jerusalem through all the way through Rome. And actually, they spent 3 months in the land of Malta, or the island of Malta. And Paul's party, and now is sailing to Rome. This is their final destination. And the ship or the boat that they've landed is broken. It was lost. So that when you look at 11, they're on a different ship. And after 3 months, we set sail in a ship that has been wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria, with the twin gods as a figurehead. And just as the ship that was lost, this is actually a ship that was of Alexandria, and it was going as a cargo ship to Rome. And the name of the ship was Twin Gods, a figurehead. And this is the two twin gods, right? Twin gods. And what this really means is actually Zeus's son, or Zeus's two sons. And everybody has their own gods, and they have their own superstition actually to protect them through storms and things like that. This is the figurehead that they would put in front of the boat. And actually the boat was actually getting to other stops, but they go to the other spots that they have stopped. Let's look at the map here. This is Malta that they have started off, the island of Malta, and they go to Rhegium and they go to Puteoli. And this is the two stops that they actually go. And so this actually, Puteoli, is actually this, and they walk to Rome from Puteoli. And so in that middle of there is actually a place called Trace, or Three Taverns. And these are the places that they actually walk towards Rome. And these are the places that they stop. So you don't have to stop showing this now. And actually, when the ship's mission or the ship crew line was done, this is what happens. And so Paul has arrived in Rome safely. And they left from Jerusalem and actually going towards Caesar. And he has arrived safely in Rome. And does it end here? And since he has arrived here safely, is that the end for Paul? Is that what God has promised him, so it's over? And so for Paul, and he came, and if this was the end, then he doesn't need to come as a prisoner. If that's just the arrival to Rome was the end goal, then he could have come not as a prisoner. There's no reason for him to be a prisoner, right? But for God's plan and bringing Paul as a prisoner, that means that there's other meaning. And the first thing that we have seen is that the 40 secret people that wanted to kill Paul, the Jews that actually plotted against Paul. But the second thing that we can see here is those who has traveled with Paul, the 276 people and the lives for them. And these, and actually more accurately, it's including Paul in that number, 276. Whether it's included or not, that's important. Now, Paul was not, if it was not a prisoner, he would have not been on this boat. And because this was a cargo ship that was owned by Rome. And if Paul wasn't on that ship, and then everybody would have died in that ship, right? And as Paul has actually boarded that flight as a prisoner, the 276 souls were saved through Paul. And was that the end, though? Is it really the end? And God, is it just for 276 people to save them? Is that why that Paul was on that ship? And I'm sure there are other meanings. And the savings of the 276, there's other meanings to that. However, for us, what we think about is there's more. We thought it was maybe this, but God is bringing me here. And maybe God is bringing, and maybe we experience these things and say these things. But when you get there, it is completely different than the things that we've thought through. And so for God, when God was with Paul and the 276 souls that was with Paul was like this. And this is in is actually 27, Acts 27:24. He said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sailed with you." And so what Paul is saying is, Paul's been told by God that he's going to be all saved. It doesn't say, "I'm going to just save them." It says, "I have granted you." It says, "granted you all the 270." This is a very expression that has to be learned or understood. And for Luke, as he was writing Acts, the 276, he details this. Why would he actually detail that there were 276 souls on the ship? And that is why the 276 people, we need to kind of understand that before we move on. But 276 people in the death storm that they were on for 14 days where it was dark, they couldn't see the sky, they couldn't see anywhere else. And this was actually going up and down. They thought they're going to die, they're going to live, they're going to die, went up and down for 14 days straight. And actually, at the end, not one soul was lost. And this was a miracle, and they have landed on the island of Malta. And so they witnessed Paul actually being bitten by a viperous snake that kind of hung from his hand, but they saw him not die from that either. And even in that places, and in the leader of that island, Publius, and basically his father was actually healed by Paul, and they saw the ailment and the illness depart from that person as well. So they saw the miracles in the 3 months as they were staying there. And for the 3 months, if somebody was hurt or somebody was sick, they were healed. And through Jesus' name, when he prayed for them, they were all healed. And for 3 months, this kind of continually and repeated throughout that time. And then in Malta's island, it's not a large island. What do you think would have happened? For 3 months, it was the workings of the God through Paul. And so for 3 months, this was an area where God's plan was being really shown. And so every 276 people have experienced every one of that. So what do you think happened when they arrived in Rome? Just think about that a second. They've overcome death, and they have seen the miracle things of Malta Island, and they have seen the witness, all the things that God has done. So when they gone home, what do you think would happen to them? Each one of them. Can you imagine that? And those who have gone to the military, when they come home, do they talk about? They always talk about the military. And what about the people who have suffered? They almost died and they lived and in the ship. They would always talk about that. This is the nature of human beings. And this is an amazing feat that they have gone through and experienced in a short period of time. So when they met their family, when they met their friends, when they met the relatives, when they asked something, they would have told them about this. Even if they didn't ask, they would have shared the stories of what happened to them. They would have talked about what they talked about when they were eating, when they were drinking. They would have talked about this all the time. And that is why, my beloved, the 276 people, when they landed in Rome, and from every provinces of Rome, they must have talked about what happened to them. Think about that. But 276, we need to look at who they were. Who was there? It was the centurion, right? And centurion means that there was probably about 80 soldiers that was under a centurion. So that there was 80 soldiers and probably 20 leadership of that, right? And at that time, if you wanted to be a soldier for Rome, you had to be a Roman citizen. And so in the Roman citizens, and they probably had very dignitaries and sons of dignitaries that was part of the military here, I am sure. And what about the people who ran the boat, the people of the staff, the ownership, and who was also there? It was also some of the prisoners that was there. So then, when you look at the 276, from the regular people all the way to soldiers, all the way to prisoners, and they saw the workings of God together. And so it was in every corner of Rome that was being spoken to. And so when Paul arrived in Rome, that he was already famous for what he has done. He didn't do anything to market himself, but it was already known. And that people knew who Paul was from that experience. And so this was a great place for Paul now. The setting was there to deliver the gospel. And if he went as a free person there, and if he went there, if you imagine that, then this type of event would have never happened. Even if it came naturally and freely, he would have never had this kind of a baseline for him to deliver the gospel. And for God has already prepared this as a prisoner, he's sending him in here. And so through one Paul of Paul, that 276 people that used every one of those to deliver and make the setting. And actually the intensity of the 270 people who was talking about this, and the 3 months that God has trained the 276 people, and it's regardless of the soldiers, regardless of the citizens and the backgrounds and the leadership, the ownership, all these people, the prisoners, they all became the baseline of the setting for Rome. And this is an amazing feat. Isn't this amazing how God did this? We couldn't imagine this at all. Let's look at verse 16. It says this, and when we came to Rome, Paul was allowed to stay by himself with the soldier who guarded him. So Paul actually was a prisoner, but he wasn't in prison. If he was in prison, there was no communication at all. But actually there was a home that he was at to be able to go to, and there was one soldier that guarded him. And everyone, he had the freedom. He just couldn't go outside that house. But many people could come and see and visit him. And so as he was at a home, everybody that came, he could visit with him and then deliver the gospel. Is that a prisoner really? No, not really. And for Paul, and as he was in Rome, and there's one thing that he had in his heart that grieved in his heart. And there's one thing that always concerned him, that he thought that the Jews of Rome would have heard message. And actually, there was a message where he came to report the Jews to the Rome, right? The Jews could have thought that, right? Because he said since he appealed to Caesar, that he would have actually accused the Jews and the leadership of misdoings to Caesar. And so everyone who wanted to kill Paul in Jerusalem, they probably sent a letter to the Jews in Rome, right? This is preempting that arrival from Paul. And so that when he was there, that the Jews are going to again try to attack him in Rome. And that was kind of the concern that Paul had. And I think that possibility was there and always will be there. And so as he has arrived, and about 3 days after he arrived to Rome, so he calls the leadership of the Jewish people in Rome and brings them to his house. And he starts to explain himself. Let's look at verse 19. But because the Jews objected, I was compelled to appeal to Caesar, though I had no charge to bring against my nation. And so what he's saying is, look, this is what I'm concerned about. I'm not gonna raise this issue with Caesar. Let's look at verse 21. And he said to him, we received no letter from Judea about you, and none of the brothers coming here has reported or spoken any evil about you. And so they said, we haven't received any letter. And there's no one that's speaking ill will about you, Paul. And we need to look at this a little bit. And what did Paul and God actually protected Paul so that none of these things. And so many scholars say, look, there's no way a letter was not sent. It was probably maybe coming later, or it was destroyed during the service. But this is something that had to be sent. But since the letter wasn't sent, that what Paul was concerned about, and as Paul arrived, all these things became no issue for Paul. God did that. And really for Paul, and through these events, and all the people of the Jews was actually prepared to receive the gospel. Let's look at verse 22. It says, but we desire to hear from you what your views are, for with regards to the sect that we know everywhere it is spoken against. And so for Paul, and when he went there, the Jews actually, they say, what did they all say? They say, no, they weren't against Paul. He says, Paul, we want to hear what you're talking about. We want to hear about this sect. And we want to hear what the gospel of the cross is, what this is. We want to know what that is, Paul. What is this? This is actually saying, let us hear the gospel. And it's not like delivering the gospel to someone who doesn't want to talk about it. It is really easy to deliver the gospel to someone that says, please talk to me about that. And this was actually the leadership of the Jews and the leadership head of the Jews. And for Paul, wanted to explain himself. He was worried about that, but God didn't prepare him. And through the events, all his worries, God has allowed him to deliver the gospel more accurately to the Jews. Isn't this amazing work of God? And for God, he does another thing for Paul. And as he has arrived in Rome, and he gives him a gift that he doesn't anticipate. He didn't even think about that. He gets a gift. And it's actually comfort and joy in his heart. And regardless of where he went, there was brothers who met him on the way in his journey in Rome. And in the journey that they walked to Rome, and every place they went, and even until they went, they walked with him to the journey to Rome. Let's look at verse 14 and 15. And there we found brothers, and were invited to stay with them for 7 days. And so we came to Rome, and the brothers there, when they heard of us, came as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. On seeing them, Paul thanked God and took courage. And so let's take a look at this. And actually, it's actually about, for 3 taverns, this is 53 kilometers. And for Appius, and it's actually 69 kilometers. And all the Christians in Rome, they heard the news that Paul was coming. And they came that distance to meet with Paul. What, did he really think about this? And so until he went to Rome, they went with him. They talked with him. They heard his story, and they continually walked with him until he arrived in Rome. This must have been great comfort and joy for Paul. And that's why he said it took courage. And so for all these things, he did not even imagine when he appealed himself to Caesar that he had 276 people, that the Jews would do this, and the brothers would actually meet him and receive him and care for him all the way to Rome. He didn't even think about that. And God has prepared him as a prisoner and coming to Rome. There's many these things God has prepared. And this is the God that we have. And Paul only worried about it. Why would I be a prisoner, he says. What do you think is going to happen to me? When he was all worried about this. However, when God was sending Paul as a prisoner, he prepared everything for his safety, and all the comfort and protection was ready for him at the end. And he doesn't imagine the brothers comes and gives him comfort. This is a great gift from God. And you know what this means? Is that for when we are in the hands of God and God's leading us, this is the grace of God. God leads us. It's not just our feet leading. It's not just us desires to go, but it is actually, it's not some participation, but it's not what we want to live in our lives, but it is actually leading by God. This is the life of the person who's called by God, and this is the grace that God bestows to those. And those, Joseph was sold by his brothers as a slave to Egypt. He was actually dragged away. He was sold away. He did not want to have that happen to him. However, it took Joseph and actually took him and couldn't even remember. And he has joy that he can even remember. This is in action Genesis 45, 7 and 8. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father of Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house and the ruler over all the land of Egypt. And for Joseph, he was sold as a slave. He thought he was a slave, and that his brothers did a very bad thing to him, and that his life was completely in ruin. And yes, he thought he was just sold as a slave, but at the end, it wasn't it. God sent him there. God led him there. God called him there. And for Joseph, made him the father of Pharaoh, and actually made him the Lord of all, and he was the overall ruler of Egypt. And God sent Joseph there. He thought he was dragged there. Thought he was sold, and he was actually really deceived by his brother to do that. But that wasn't it. God wanted to do this, to be the ruler and be able to rule over everything. And he knew at that time. And so, and through that, and all the people, the 70 people that was actually in the death times, It actually was the savior of that family that became the people of Israel. And in fact, the covenant God made with Abraham was realized through Joseph. And he thought he would never meet his father or his brother Benjamin. But that God granted that grace. He didn't even ask for that. It was something that he couldn't even imagine. But God has granted that to him for father and his younger brother Benjamin to meet. And he had the joy of meeting them again. And in this, and when people are in the hands and led by God, this is the grace that God bestows. And this is the grace that we need to live under. And we want to live a life that we want to live. And we have a very strong desire. And we think that is actually prosperity and joy for us. If we live in what I want to do, and that they think that that's good things. But you know why? It doesn't do well. And this is not what I wanted to live. And that's why people are saying that they're not satisfied with their life. This is not what they want. And so I came to the United States. My whole life was ruined. And when I met this person, my whole life was actually turned upside down. And somebody really deceived me and tricked me. So I'm there. And I came to the Great Tree Church, and so I met that person. I hope that there's nothing like that. I bless you on that. But as you come to the Great Tree Church, and because I met that person, I hope there's nothing like that ever. But there's so many things in life that we hear about, and we think about this. And because that we're not doing what we want to do. And many Christians, he says, for me, I'm not living a life that I want to live. And right now, I'm not happy with that because that's not what I want to. This place is not, this situation is not. And many people are living in that situation. And in that place, regardless of who did well or what I did wrong, it's not that. But it is actually, they feel that their life is in a twisted mess. There's no joy. There's no happiness there. And so for that. And because you're not living or doing the things that you're doing, that's not always joyful. And if you're doing all the things that you want to do, there's no place for God's grace to come and interact. And take a look at this. And if I'm living a life that I want to live, and that means that all the things that I don't want to go, I don't want to do, discomfort, I don't want to do, those people that I don't want to meet, I don't want to meet them, right? That's what you're saying. However, that you don't want to be in a place of training. You don't want to be in a place of refining. You don't want to be in a place of difficulty. But why would you need God's grace then? That you're doing everything that you're doing and living a life that you're doing. And why would you need God's grace there? However, but in the people who are led by the hands of God and for God's grace's help and God's grace, you cannot live without that. And so when Lord was with Joseph, he became a successful man. And if he didn't have that grace, how would he live? Why would the Lord was with Joseph, and that is why his life was possible. And for Saul, every day for David, Saul was sought by David, or David sought Saul to kill him every day. And he was always running away from him. And he must have he would have caught in depression, and he would have not slept at all. However, every day, although Saul was seeking to kill David, David was still protected by God, and he had the grace of God with him. That's why he could live. My beloved, if you're living a life that you want to live by yourself, that's not a great life. It is a life that's led by God. That's a true blessing in life. Do you believe that? Let me say it again. And if you're in the hands of God and led by God, that is a true blessed life. But in our lives, we want to live something like this because I'm not doing what I'm doing. And this becomes very, very caught in our hearts. But however, through that, you see the realization of salvation in your life. If you're living a life that you want to do, and that you do all these things that your thoughts, then there's no way that the salvation work could happen in your life. Then you're doing what you want to do. You don't want to meet people, you don't meet people. Is that really salvation in your life? However, but even in difficult situations that you meet people you don't want to meet, that you don't want to do some of the work, you have to do that work. And you have to take those things and account for your work. And what happens in between, and there is salvation work. And then you're doing something you don't want to do, but God has given you that. And when you finish that work, and through that work, what happens? There's more events and greater joy that happen. This is the work of God. And my beloved, and through that, when you're handling that work, then God gives grace that we can't imagine through that. And this is important. And when we're working in the calling of God, and when we are living with Christ, and when we are suffering with Christ and work through God, and what we have to experience is that the comfort and joy that we must experience. Yes, God is really thinking about me. God must have really prepared this for me, something I couldn't even imagine. And if you don't do that, then you start regretting your life. You said, my life must have been messed up. It's not right. There's only suffering in my life. And why would I not do what? Why did I just do only what I want to do and stubbornly request that? There's many people do that. Even the people that I've met in my life, there's many people that actually did this. And there's nothing that they said, only thing that's left is hurts. And the only thing and these are the things that I did. I don't know why I lived like this and so ignorant to that. How stupid was I to live the way that I wanted. And there's so many people who live this way. But what we really need to do is that we need to be held in the hands of God and led by God. And you said, God has given me this type of joy. And through this, God is comforting me. God has prepared this. And we need to experience this with God. And at that time, the life becomes a blessed life. And in yourself. And then as we are held by the life, I hope that you're blessed by God. I hope that you're led by the hands of God, that you're led by God, protected by God, comforted by God, and the joy from God. And really the things that you can't even fathom and imagine, and the grace and joy. And I bless you in Jesus' name. Let us sing together now.